All right, so picture this London in the 1940s.
Oh, yeah.
A city on edge, already on edge from the Blitz.
Right.
And the blackout. The blackout that's meant to protect citizens.
Right.
It actually becomes a shield for a serial killer.
Wow.
Now, you shared with us 2 episodes of the Morbid podcast.
Yeah.
And about the Blackout Ripper, Gordon Cummins.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, this case is as fascinating as it is terrifying.
It is. It's remarkable how this case, despite the brutality and, those unsettling parallels to Jack the Ripper, remained largely forgotten for so long.
You're right. It's like the chaos of war just completely overshadowed these horrific crimes.
Right.
Let's paint a picture for our listener, though, of London during that time.
Okay.
We're talking nightly blackouts, the constant fear of air raids, a city on edge. I read that traffic deaths doubled in the first month of blackouts alone.
Wow.
Can you imagine the fear and uncertainty?
It was a complete upheaval of daily life.
Yeah.
By 1942, 1 in 5 Londoners had been injured just due to the blackout conditions.
Wow.
The government was even releasing prisoners with less than 3 months left on their sentences.
Oh.
Just to alleviate overcrowding and minimize risks during air raids.
So you have a city already grappling with wartime anxieties.
Yeah.
And then you add this element of increased criminal activity.
Right.
It's like a recipe for disaster.
It is, and Cummins exploited that very chaos.
Yeah.
One detail from the podcast that really stuck with me was how criminals were actually using those civilian air raid precaution armbands.
Oh, wow.
To their advantage, they'd put on these symbols of safety
Wow.
and then use the blackout as cover to commit crimes like looting.
That's crazy.
It's chilling.
Yeah.
A chilling reminder that even in times of crisis, darkness can bring out the worst in some.
Right. And now, turning to the victims, it's important to remember that these were real women with lives and stories, not just names on a police report.
Right.
The first was Evelyn Hamilton. She was a 41-year-old pharmacist who was just passing through London on her way to a new job.
Wow.
To think her life was cut short so brutally.
And the way her body was posed.
I know.
In the doorway of an air raid shelter.
Yeah.
It speaks volumes. It wasn't just about taking a life.
Right.
There's a clear element of staging and deliberate cruelty.
It's unsettling, for sure, than there was Evelyn Oatley.
Yes.
A 34-year-old aspiring actress.
Mm-hmm.
Both Evelyn Hamilton and Evelyn Oatley were turning to sex work to make ends meet during the war.
Right.
Which was a common thread among Cummins' victims.
That's an important point. These women were already facing immense challenges in wartime London, and their circumstances made them particularly vulnerable to someone like Cummins.
Okay, so with Evelyn Oatley's murder, things take a truly dark turn.
Yes, they do.
The level of brutality just escalates dramatically.
The podcast mentioned a neighbor heard a radio suddenly blasting from her apartment. Most likely Cummins trying to muffle her screams.
Wow.
And it speaks to a level of premeditation.
I know.
That's truly disturbing. And then there are the details about the objects he used.
Right.
A tin opener, curling tongs, even a broken mirror fragment.
It's so chilling, those everyday, almost mundane items.
Yeah.
It just makes the violence feel even more intrusive somehow.
Yeah.
It hits closer to home,
It adds a layer of psychological complexity to the case, right? It wasn't about using a weapon in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
It was about inflicting pain with whatever was at hand, highlighting a certain level of depravity.
It's terrifying to think about. Yeah. And it wasn't just Evelyn Oatley.
No.
2 other women, Mary Haywood and Catherine Mulkey, narrowly escaped Cummins' attacks.
They did.
Their stories give us a glimpse into his methods, right?
Absolutely. He would often present himself as charming and harmless.
Yeah.
Luring his victims into a false sense of security.
The detail that stood out to me from Mary Haywood's account was how Cummins kept muttering, "You won't, you won't, you won't," while he was choking her.
It's a chilling detail.
I know.
That's never been fully explained. What do you make of that?
It's a question that lingers for sure, sadly, for the next victim, Margaret Lowe.
Yes.
There would be no escape. Margaret, a 48-year-old widow, had turned to sex work to support herself and her 15-year-old daughter.
And think about the impact on Margaret's daughter.
Oh, my God.
Losing her mother in such a horrific way amidst the backdrop of war, it's heartbreaking.
Absolutely. Her murder was perhaps the most brutal of them all.
It was.
I can't even imagine the terror she must have felt.
The podcast described her being beaten with a fireplace poker so violently that it broke in two.
Oh, my God.
Then the mutilations inflicted with a razor, a potato peeler, a table knife. It's truly horrific.
Almost unimaginable. And what's truly remarkable is that all of this was happening within a very short time frame.
Right.
He attacked multiple women, murdered 3, all within a matter of days.
The speed and the brutality were staggering. You know, it begs the question, how was Cummins able to operate so freely for so long without raising more alarms?
Well, it's crucial to remember the context here.
Yeah.
Wartime London was chaotic, overcrowded.
Right.
And the police were stretched thin.
Yes.
They were focused on war-related issues and maintaining order during the blackouts.
Of course. And then there's the issue of how society viewed sex workers at that time.
Right.
They were often marginalized and overlooked, making them easy targets for someone like Cummins.
It's a sad reality. We touched on this earlier.
Right.
But it's a stark reminder of how societal biases can shape not only investigations, but also our collective memory of these crimes.
It is. It's a tragic reflection of how societal biases can shape not only investigations, but also our collective memory of these crimes. Thankfully, Cummins' reign of terror didn't last forever. Wow. He made a crucial mistake.
Okay.
And that's where things took a turn.
It sounds like something straight out of a detective novel. What was it?
So after attacking Mary Haywood, he fled the scene.
Yeah. But in his haste, he left behind his RAF-issued respirator bag.
You've got to be kidding me. That's almost too perfect. I bet the investigators were floored.
It was a game changer. The bag had his service number on it.
Oh, wow.
Leading them directly to Gordon Frederick Cummins, a 28-year-old leading aircraftman.
So you have this seemingly ordinary airman, well-liked by his peers, aspiring to be a pilot.
Right.
And all the while, he's living this double life as a brutal killer.
Exactly. When they brought him in for questioning,
yeah,
he initially tried to play it off like he was just drunk and disorderly, claiming he couldn't remember anything about the attack on Haywood.
Did he really think that would work?
Of course not. As the investigation progressed, the evidence against him became overwhelming.
Right.
They found stolen items in his possession that directly linked him to the victims.
Oh, wow.
Evelyn Oatley's cigarette case.
Yeah.
A pen engraved with Doris Journet's initials.
Oh.
Even a watch belonging to her that her husband specifically remembered was broken. It's like he was collecting trophies from his crimes.
It's a chilling observation. The fact that he chose such personal, often sentimental items is significant.
Yeah.
It wasn't about monetary gain. It was about power and control. These were tokens to remind him of his dominance over these women.
I remember the detail about the comb he took from Doris Journet.
Yes.
It was a cheap comb, missing teeth, something her husband had offered to replace.
Right.
But she liked it. It was hers.
Right.
And he took it. It's such a small thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it just feels so violating.
It speaks to the deeply personal nature of his crimes.
Right.
These weren't random acts of violence. There was a deliberate pattern of objectification and dehumanization.
Yeah. And then, of course, he had the fingerprints and footprints connecting him to the crime scenes.
Yes. The forensic evidence, especially for that era, was surprisingly strong.
What about the mortar dust analysis they used to link him to Evelyn Hamilton's murder?
Right.
That was impressive detective work.
It was... The investigators really went above and beyond. Considering the limitations of forensic science at the time, they built a solid case against Cummins.
So they had the evidence. What happened next?
They formally charged Cummins with the murders of Evelyn Oatley, Margaret Lowe, and Doris Journet.
Okay.
They suspected Evelyn Hamilton was his first victim,
Yeah.
but couldn't definitively link him at the time of the arraignment.
Gotcha. So this seemingly charming airman is now on trial for the brutal murders of 3 women.
Yes.
What was the public reaction?
You know, those who knew him were stunned.
Yeah.
He had this reputation as a likable, efficient airman.
Wow.
Ambitious and well-spoken. His wife couldn't believe he would do anything to jeopardize his dream of becoming a pilot.
Really?
She maintained that their marriage was perfect.
Wow. It's hard to reconcile those 2 images, the charming airman and the brutal killer.
It speaks to the complexity of criminal psychology. He was able to compartmentalize, presenting this carefully constructed persona to the world while harboring these dark, violent urges. But there's another twist to the story. During the trial, something unprecedented happened, a mistrial.
Really? What happened?
The jury was accidentally shown evidence from a different crime scene.
Oh, wow.
Something that had never happened before at the Old Bailey.
Wow.
The judge was furious,
Yeah.
emphasizing the importance of an unbiased jury and the potential for media coverage to influence their perceptions.
So high-stakes drama right there in the courtroom.
It was.
But even with a new jury, the outcome was inevitable, right?
Absolutely. The evidence was simply too strong.
Yeah.
Cummins' defense, which basically amounted to claiming amnesia and denying any involvement, was weak and unconvincing.
So despite that mistrial, the evidence won out in the end.
Yes. The new jury deliberated and ultimately found Cummins guilty of the murder of Evelyn Oatley.
I'm assuming justice was served them.
In the legal sense, absolutely. He was sentenced to death by hanging, a common punishment for murder at the time. Cummins even tried to appeal the verdict.
Oh, wow.
Arguing that the media coverage had prejudiced the jury, but his appeal was quickly dismissed. The judges stated that the evidence against him was, and I quote, overwhelming.
Wow. It's fascinating how thorough that investigation was, especially given, the challenges of wartime.
Right.
And the limited forensic technology of the era.
It speaks to the dedication of the investigators.
Yeah.
They were determined to bring Cummins to justice even amidst the chaos of war. But here's the thing.
Okay.
Even facing execution, Cummins continued to maintain his innocence.
After all that evidence, that's almost harder to believe than the crimes themselves.
I know, right?
It shows a chilling detachment from reality.
It really does. It highlights the deeply ingrained denial and delusion that can exist within individuals like Cummins.
Yeah.
But the story doesn't end there. What's particularly intriguing is why this case, unlike Jack the Ripper, faded into obscurity.
That's what I was thinking. It feels like there's a bigger story here, beyond just the facts of the case. Why do you think the Blackout Ripper wasn't as widely remembered?
There are a few possible explanations. Firstly, the backdrop of World War II understandably overshadowed many events of that era.
Right.
The focus was on the war effort, and news of a serial killer, even one as brutal as Cummins, might have seemed like a secondary concern at the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. The war was such a massive, world-altering event.
Right.
It's easy to see how other stories might have been lost in the shuffle.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of the victim's social standing.
Yeah.
They were women, many of whom were involved in sex work.
Right.
A marginalized group at the time. Their stories were less likely to garner widespread attention or sympathy,
right,
particularly in a society that often stigmatized sex workers.
It's a sad reality, and we touched on this earlier.
Yeah.
But it's a stark reminder of how societal biases can impact not only how justice is served,
yes,
but also how we remember these crimes.
Exactly. And that's why the work of historians like Hallie Rubenhold is so important.
Right.
She's doing incredible work to bring these forgotten cases back into the light, especially those involving marginalized victims.
I know she's done extensive work on Jack the Ripper,
right,
focusing on the lives of the victims, and it sounds like she's applying a similar approach to the Blackout Ripper case.
Yes. In her podcast, The Blackout Ripper, she delves into the lives of each victim. Evelyn Hamilton, Evelyn Oatley, Margaret Lowe, Doris Joannet.
Yeah.
She paints such a vivid picture of their lives, their hopes, their struggles.
Right.
Reminding us that they were more than just case files or statistics.
Yeah. Right.
They were daughters, mothers, friends.
It's so crucial to humanize these victims, to see them as individuals with their own stories.
It is.
And to acknowledge the societal forces that made them vulnerable in the first place.
Absolutely. Rubenhold argues that the chaos of war disproportionately impacted women like Cummins' victims. They were facing not only the constant threat of bombing raids, but also economic hardship, social stigma, a lack of support systems.
Yeah.
These were women trying to survive in extraordinary circumstances, and their stories deserve to be heard and remembered.
You're right. It's not enough to just focus on the killer.
Exactly.
We need to understand the world in which these crimes took place.
Right.
What factors allowed someone like Cummins to thrive?
Yeah.
What can we learn from this case all these years later?
That's the real power of a deep dive, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're not just learning about a crime.
Right.
We're examining a complex web of social, historical, and psychological factors. And I think the Blackout Ripper case ultimately serves as a stark reminder that even amidst global upheaval, individual stories of violence and vulnerability deserve to be heard and remembered.
It's a call to action, isn't it? To look beyond the headlines, to question our assumptions, and to make sure that these stories are never truly lost.
Absolutely. And perhaps it encourages us to ask ourselves, have we truly learned from the past? Are we doing enough to protect the vulnerable in our own time?
Right.
These are questions worth pondering and ones that I hope our listeners will continue to explore.
Well said. On that note, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. Have you ever encountered a historical event or figure that seemed oddly obscure, given its significance?
Yeah.
Something that made you wonder why it hadn't received more attention? We're always eager to uncover those hidden stories that shape our world.
For sure.
Thanks for diving in with us.